This is the Microsoft Cloud Show, episode 97. We're going to talk about all the news and announcements from AzureCon 2015. Welcome to the Microsoft Cloud Show, the only place to stay up to date on everything going on in the Microsoft Cloud world, including Windows Azure, Office 365, SharePoint, Exchange, Lync, and related technologies. Just the information, no marketing, no BS. I'm Chris Johnson.
And I'm Andrew Call.
And we're just two dudes telling you how we see it. Hey, good morning, AC.
Hey, man, how are you doing today?
Whew, information overload, buddy.
Yeah, man, yesterday was a big day, wasn't it?
Oh, my goodness. Unbelievable. Yeah, so it was AzureCon 2015 yesterday, which is kind of mostly a virtual event, I think.
It was a virtual and mostly a recorded event, too. I guess they did. It was this was on, September the 29th on Tuesday?
Yeah.
For a couple hours. A lot of the content's online that people can go take a look at, but they had a couple live keynotes, and then they did. Then they had a boatload of announcements and little recorded sessions that they played that Microsoft people had recorded ahead of time. Yeah,
there was a lot of good content actually. It was pretty decent.
There was.
But anyway, what have you been kicking around before we get stuck into a boatload of news from around Azure and the Microsoft Cloud? What have you been up to?
Yeah, man. Well, I wrapped up a project that I was working on. And so now, right before I dive into another project, I've got this little void in between the time. So, you get those projects that kind of sit around and you always mean to get back to them, but they're not critical things.
Yep.
They're critical, they get done, but the timing doesn't matter. And I've got one of those, and it has been, every time I go back to it, I find it's more work than I thought it was going to be. And so I ended up punting it again.
Yeah.
So this one was, I run a multi-tenant Orchard instance in Azure that hosts my blog, andrewcall.com, our podcast, MicrosoftCloudShow.com, and our startup, Curb.com.
Mm-hmm.
And it's trying to get get a dev instance of that running locally that mirrors what we have in production, but with backed and restored databases into developer databases and developer code base and all that stuff to get it running local. And then I also want it running not ultimately local. I really want this stuff running in a dev instance in Azure, a dev resource group that most of the stuff is just shut off, and I turn it on when I need to go do some testing so I don't have to fire up a VM. And holy moly, man, for some reason, it's been incredibly hard for me to get it working until this morning. And I finally got everything working locally, finally got all this stuff working. It was a lot more complicated than I thought it was going to be. Just trying to run multiple domains and multi-tenants off an Orchard instance when you're doing it on, say, Windows 8 and not multiple websites. It was a little tricky.
Yeah, I love it when you have those, as a developer, when you have those epiphany moments, which is oh, I've slept on it and now it's easy.
Yeah.
Right? Or you're frustrated, you leave it for a while, you come back and you're like, why was I being so stupid? I've totally nailed this. Oh, good work.
Yeah, looking back at it, I can see that where I was trying to overcomplicate it, and I should have just done the whole KISS principle and just kept it simple, stupid.
Yeah, that's usually the case, isn't it?
Yeah.
But when you're stuck in the weeds, right, it's hard to see that sometimes.
It is. So what have you been up to lately? How are you doing?
Oh, man, this week we are moving into new offices. So, we should be tomorrow, actually be able to go into them. But this week I've been sitting at the office getting internet installed and getting all our wiring and networking stuff done. And there's been contractors painting and building a couple of walls and doing a few things like that. So I've been sitting on the floor in an empty office. We've got about 4,000 square feet or something like that. It's not huge, but it's not small.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been sitting on the floor. I get laptop back. Right? Sort of back from sitting on the floor and not properly. So, but hopefully, our furniture's been arriving and paint's going in and all that. So it's all coming together.
Awesome. That's got to be exciting to get in. You think you'll actually be in and have all the contractors gone tomorrow afternoon?
I'd say there's 4/5 of fuck all chance that's going to happen.
Shake the magic 8 ball. He says, signs don't point to yes.
Contractors are incredible.
Hey, be careful now. Be careful. While you say this, be very careful.
Building contractors and painters.
Okay, go. Feel free.
They come in and do one tiny little thing. And then a couple of hours later, somebody else will just wander in and be like, do one tiny little thing. And it's this stream of people. And it's like, one dude like tightens a screw, and then the next guy will, come and hang something on it. And it's this weird sort of procession of things that have to happen. And then as soon as something goes wrong, the whole process falls apart.
Yeah. I'll come back tomorrow and see if I can actually get my job done once Jim has done his stuff.
Yeah, and then they don't talk to each other either, so it's like babysitting. Anyway, but yeah, so hopefully we'll be in some state of disrepair tomorrow.
Cool. At least you have all of your, like right now you've got the people that are working for you guys. Are you guys just all like in a co-work space or working in a Starbucks or something? Or
Yep, co-work.
Gotcha.
Got like an open plan co-work space, and we're dying to get into our space.
Get your own yeah. So it's not packing up backpacks every single day. You can actually have set up shop.
Have like proper. I bought this 27-inch like 4K Retina display.
Yeah.
It's badass, man, but I haven't been able to use it. It's still in a box. I'm looking forward to getting properly set up.
It's a great screen in your trunk.
Exactly, yeah.
Nice.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, hey, we got, there was a ton of stuff here that went on with the AzureCon stuff yesterday. So I guess we were talking about it earlier. A couple things we want to do that are kind of like, I guess, changing up a little bit for our podcast. But usually we put all of the links of stuff that we refer to in the show notes. So if you go to our site, you can see what's in the show notes. But I think that what we've talked about doing, what we want to do from now on, we've been kind of doing two things in the past. We've been putting all the links in the show notes, but then we also have been putting them in our Flipboard called the Microsoft Cloud Show that you and I both contribute to. So I think that what you and I said we were going to do going forward is that any of the links that we talk about during the show, we're going to throw stuff in our Flipboard called the Microsoft Cloud Show, so where you guys can get your own, all of our listeners, you guys can go to that. You can subscribe to it, follow it, and you can see things we find throughout the week, things we talk about on the show. That will be not only everything we talk about on the show, but it'll also have some additional stuff that we find. So that'll be, and we won't spam it. Of course, the last 24 hours has been spammed because we've just had there's so much news that came out yesterday, but we will put a link to the show in the show notes to our Flipboard where you can find all the links.
Yeah, I don't know if you haven't used Flipboard before. It's pretty cool, but it's definitely a way I'm consuming more and more news through Flipboard these days, subscribing to different topics and things like that. And it's a nice way to tune in to different tags and topics and things, and just be able to flip through the news. It's great for consumption.
We got over 200 articles in there right now. We've got 96 followers, and we've had 294 views of the Flipboard. So we'll see. I mean, that's a great place for you guys to go take a look at the stuff that we're doing, and you can reflip it into your own stuff or pen it and read it later and all that kind of jazz. So it's definitely pretty cool.
Nice. So why don't we get started with some news? In summary, yesterday's event, obviously it was AzureCon, right? It's all about Azure. But the topics spanned a pretty wide range of topics. So we had things from, big data all the way through to IoT, through to developing things with Docker, IT pro topics, dev topics, all sorts of stuff. So it really spans the gamut. And there was definitely something for everybody. But I think, we could probably pick and choose rather than running through all of these. So why don't we kick off with a couple of our favorites, and then we'll go from there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I will say there's one thing that I did want to say before we kind of really start diving into it. So if you guys missed it, we've flipped it in Flipboard. We put the link to it, to the event up on, that's in Channel 9. You can go grab all the videos from it and you can watch it, you can watch some of the videos of stuff that you want to go back and see later. There is one thing that does kind of frustrate me a little bit about Azure these days. And I get why they do it, but it seems that everything about this, the people I talked to that watched this, some of the ones tuned out early, as did I. And it's primarily because I think all this stuff is always so focused around big business and around scale and enterprise, where, there's one of the biggest appeals to the cloud to me is in the startup space. And while they do talk a lot about the startup space, it seems like all the big news and all these events are primarily focused around the big stuff. So they're talking about, we've done, billions of authentications, and we can do this, we could do, tons of huge CDNs and big storage announcements and stuff. And hey, that's all great. But let's talk about some of the advancements and improvements that we can have specifically around startups or that pertain to startups. So that's one of my kind of negative feedback things here. But
yeah,
that's the only kind of negative thing I have from it. There's a lot of other, but then we'll talk about all the great stuff for it. So
yeah, no, that's fair. I think some of the stuff I saw you did around Docker and stuff, that was pretty cool for startups, right? Building apps at scale and things like that.
That's a tech I really want to carve out some time and play with that a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know enough about it, but I've been playing around with it. It's pretty sweet.
There was a really good interview with Dan Wallin on .NET Rocks recently, where he was talking about his experience and getting up to speed on it. So definitely go take a look at that if you guys are interested.
Yeah, that's cool.
Okay, so you started off. What's interesting to you?
I'll start one off with something near and dear to my heart around Office 365, and that is the general availability of ExpressRoute for Office 365 and Skype for Business. So what this means, it's been in preview. What this means is you can, if you have a internet link from a particular set of providers, and I can't remember off the top of my head who those folks are, then you can get a dedicated connection into Azure and Office 365, private connection. You're not going over the regular public internet at that point. And so this gives, for those customers who want to make sure or want to know that their traffic to the cloud is secure and private and all that sort of stuff, you could use ExpressRoute to do that. Give yourself a dedicated connection from your premises to, or from your network into the Microsoft network in the cloud. So that's come out of preview and is now now generally available.
Very cool. Yeah. So they even changed, offered up 2 different pricing plans available that are going to be effective on October the 1st, so people can take advantage of ExpressRoute in different ways. There's one big topic that has a lot of things associated with it, so I'm going to go through it kind of quick, is around virtual machines or around IaaS for Azure. And so the first one is a big bit of news here. This one seemed to be kind of buried yesterday, was big price reductions for the A series, for the instances A8 through A11. So it's A8, 9, 10, and 11. Some of the costs are going to fall as much as 60%. So these guys are the ones that carry the powerful Intel Xeon E5 processors and good for compute workloads. Microsoft also introduced the general availability of a next gen of the D series VMs. These are the guys that have the customized 2.4 gigahertz Intel E5 V3 Haswell procs with the Turbo Boost tech and go all the way up to 3.2. That's generally available for the D series. And then they had a new series that they're introducing. And this one was the one that, this one made the news pretty quick and early on in the announcements by Scott Guthrie yesterday. It's the N series.
Yeah.
So these are brand new. And this is one area that AWS, their VM story, their EC2 story, where they had an offering that Microsoft did not have something to match or an equivalent. And what this is these are GPU focused VMs. And so the N series, I think they're named N because they're based on the NVIDIA graphics cards, but these guys are built for doing GPU, so graphics stuff. They're built for GPU primary stuff. And so I know that these are popular with the Bitcoin guys, Bitcoin miners, because the GPUs are really good for doing Bitcoin mining. But now that Microsoft has an offering that does compete directly with the EC2 offering to have GPU specific VMs. So these come in a bunch of different sizes and are great when you're doing things like rendering video and anything that is more optimized for the graphics processing units, the GPUs, over standard CPUs.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet. And as I understand it, and I could be wrong on this, I saw a tweet that I think AWS removed their GPU offering, something like that. And so Azure are now adding it back in, or adding it in. And so that'll be interesting to see what happens there. I saw some tweet about it. I think AWS may have removed their GPU offerings. I'm not sure.
I'll have to go look that up while we're doing these. Go ahead. I'm gonna go see if that's true. That would be surprising.
Yeah. Hey, so another one was Microsoft and Akamai partnering. And so if you're not familiar with Akamai, it's a content delivery network system which basically lets you, as a customer or a web developer, or if you've got content out there on the internet, you could use a CDN to basically distribute or manage the distribution of that content around the world, so that when I'm in Timbuktu and I hit your website, I'm able to pull assets from a more local location than, say, if I was having to pull those image files or the media files or what have you from a west coast of the US data center. So Microsoft and Akamai they've been in partnership for some time, but they're doing some new work in Azure to bring an Akamai offering into the Azure CDN offering, I guess, through Azure to help you take advantage of Akamai in your Azure apps. And so they're doing some other things around Azure CDN with standard and premium bundles as well. But basically, in a nutshell, this just gives you, as a developer, or a customer, this gives you more options to distribute your content around the world and have it close to people, which is a great thing for speeding up your web apps and people hitting them from all over the world and wanting to make sure that they're speedy. So, as developers, we should be thinking about a whole lot more than we typically do, because speedy apps are more engaging and more useful to people, and you're likely to use them more if they're nice and speedy, so nice and quick. So we should be looking at this sort of stuff more often. So I thought that was a really cool announcement.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a big thing too in the mobile space too. I mean, you want to make sure that things are coming down really quick, and so Akamai's they're the CDN, or they're the content distribution guys. They're the standard on the internet, so it's nice to see it those guys team up. Another one we saw here are some improvements to what Microsoft has as an offering in Azure called the Azure IoT Suite. And so this is going to help you. The IoT Suite is something they've already had. It's now available for purchase, but they've added additional features to it. And so what IoT, it's the Internet of Things. So it's if you have small devices that are usually used as like sensors that are collecting lots of different data points, and they want to make it easy for you to be able to see the data that's coming in, be able to have some nice capabilities to help manage those devices. That's what the IoT Suite's all about. But some of the things that they've added here with this is really a lot of improvements around Stream Analytics. And so what Stream Analytics lets you do is it's an offering that we already have inside of Azure, but it takes a stream of data that's coming in and makes it easier for you to kind of work with it in a pipeline kind of sense and be able to do real-time analytics. So what they've done is they added support for the IoT Hub input, so that now Stream Analytics jobs can have a preview feature so that you can ingest data from the IoT hubs, which is going to let you do real-time analytics over millions of events from different connected devices. There's also now a presence for the Internet of Things piece in the new preview portal. I shouldn't say new preview portal. It's in the preview portal.
It's been around for a while now. We're wondering when it's going to come out of preview, right?
God, I was waiting for that. I was kind of hoping to see that at Build this past year. I think it was announced. The preview portal was announced 2 builds ago, so like 2014. And we're still waiting to see everything kind of make its way into the new one. I mean, you still have stuff that's just based in the old one, like the Active Directory stuff that's still, if you click on Active Directory, it takes you over to the old portal, not the new one. But it's kind of on a tangent to that. That's being on a Mac, you can have and I think you can do it too on Windows, where you have gestures with your fingers on your trackpad and how you can go forward and back.
Oh, yeah.
To swipe forward and back in the browser. And of course, with the Azure preview portal, where it's all like blades going from left to right, you can scroll back left and right. If you kind of get too far to the left, then you scroll again and it takes you back a page from where you previously were. So I've been living in the preview portal this whole week. And I've done that so many times. I had to finally disable that gesture on my laptop. But other thing they did too is they added support for Document DB as an output. So Stream Analytics jobs can now output their results or their output streams to Document DB for good archival and low latency querying of unstructured JSON data. And then the other thing that they really did, the other big thing they did is they added a timestamp by for single data stream events that contain multiple event types, having timestamps in different fields. And now you can use this timestamp by with an expression to specify different timestamp fields for each use case. So there's a blog post that kind of explains how to go set up your IoT Hub input, and then how to configure it to have data being sent out to Stream Analytics, and then where you can use it from there.
Nice. There was a small demo yesterday I thought I saw, which was pretty sweet, which was around the new portal specifically, which was watching both Linux and Windows bootloads of VMs, right? So you could go and see a particular VM's startup sequence to see if it's starting properly, including both Linux and Windows VMs, which I thought was a nice addition to the new portal as well.
Yeah, there was something I heard that discussed on the Azure podcast recently where they were talking about the same thing, where like with Linux always exports the log as it's booting up, but Windows has never really done that. And so the way they do it with Windows now is that it looks like you're just getting screenshots of what the VM is as it's booting. So you can even see if it failed to boot. You can even see that the bootloader error page where it would say like, NT loader not found or something like that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So if you've balked up your drives or something like that.
Yeah.
Nice. Hey, so there was a big one yesterday around the Azure Container Service. And we've spoken a little bit about Docker in the past, but there was some nice new announcements. Azure are going, gung-ho in containerization. And this was kind of the next set of steps or iteration on that journey, I should say. So they did some nice demos. They basically said Azure is going to support Apache Mesos, I think you pronounce it, for basically running container clusters and deploying apps across them. And so I think starting today or maybe yesterday, you can go spin up an Apache Mesos cluster from the Azure Quick Start project and go start deploying Docker apps into that cluster and playing around with it. Now, I think the difference here is that you were able to, in Azure in the past, you were able to create, say, an Ubuntu VM or a CentOS VM or something along those lines, and you were able to add Docker to it and get a sort of a Docker machine running. But what Apache Mesos adds is a whole lot of management around scaling that out, right? So, and management of your cluster. So multiple VMs, multiple machines, applications across that cluster and so forth. So you don't have to takes away that next sort of step, next level of, managing your own cluster and building it out and doing all that sort of stuff. And it'll take care of a lot of those things for you. I'm no expert on it. So if there's an Apache Mesos expert out there who wants to come on the show and talk to us about it, feel free to get in touch. But the point here is that they're starting to support these pieces of software that are pretty popular in the Docker world today. Things like Marathon, Docker Swarm, Mesos, and obviously the core Docker platform itself. So bringing that to Azure, being able to build your app once on your dev box and then define how you want that app to run in the cloud, and being able to deploy it to a cluster running in Azure is pretty cool. And they also hinted at about Windows containers coming. So the deal with Docker right now is that you're basically deploying Linux containers like Ubuntu or CentOS or what have you. And in the future, Microsoft are working on being able to do that with Windows Server containers as well. And which is basically, it's like a very, very lightweight miniaturized virtual machine abstracted away from the underlying platform. And so you'll be able to do that with Windows containers too. So right now you're building apps that run on Linux effectively, but you'll be able to do the same thing with these Windows containers going forward.
Yeah, the thing I understand about containers is that unlike a VM, which is a full-blown like machine but virtualized, a container says we're going to use the same OS from the host. We're not going to make you have a whole nother piece. So all you really have to have is just the app is what's your application code and application products are the ones that are going to run inside the container. So you'd have like SQL in the container, and you'd have like your app code in the container, your website, but you wouldn't have Windows in the container or IIS in the container. Yeah.
And there's a great set of talks about how it all works together. There's things like, disk differencing and how you build up a container through various different different layers of changes that happen in it. But yeah, and there's a lot of shared resources obviously between the underlying host and the sort of lightweight VM, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
But still, apps are still containerized to their own or secured to their own container. But anyway, so Azure is getting much better at this, and I think this will be really interesting to watch because it kind of changes the game in terms of how you build apps and how the rest of the industry is doing it with very, I guess, loosely coupled, for want of a better word, right?
Yeah.
Your app is detached and loosely coupled from the service it's running in, and so theoretically you'll be able to go build a web app or something like that, put it in containers, deploy it, And you could either do that to AWS or to Azure, and it should be able to just go, right? Is the theory behind it anyway.
Yeah, it allows people to have like, there's a whole, kind of like the equivalent of like an app store or something like that. Or sorry, there's a store where you can go pick a template from like Docker and say, build up this container for me. And I run my app based on that one container. And so it allows you to, one of the advantages, it allows portability for your application, but it also allows you to spin up new containers incredibly fast. Like the example I heard someone give was they had like one container was running Redis, so for caching, two for a website and one for a MongoDB, and they can spin their whole environment up in 15 seconds.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
It's nice.
I got two or three things I'll just do. Like I can do Firehose stuff on real quick. One is that Microsoft has announced native PowerShell script support in Azure Automation. So you can run your PowerShell scripts from Azure Automation.
Very smooth.
They have also announced additional regions. So now there are more Microsoft data centers than anybody else out there. And the big one yesterday that was announced was that they have 3 data centers that are now generally available in India. So they have one in central India, southern India, and western India. And that's a pretty big kind of like, hey, we're in India. It's like, we're going to give you 3 data centers. And so it's one's in, I'm going to get these wrong. I can pronounce this one, Mumbai.
Yep.
That's in West India. The one in southern India is in Chennai.
Yep.
And one in Pune.
Pune? There's no R in it, I don't think.
Oh, no, there's not. I'm looking right at it. So, and the other thing too, we talked about earlier, the EC2 instances on AWS, they still show GPU instances. They're the G2 class.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Maybe something on the internet wasn't true.
I don't believe that. There's no way.
Hey, you want to do a couple of quick picks before we wrap this up?
Yeah, man. You want to go first?
Sure. So I recently upgraded my Aural, not with an O, with an A, Aural setup for work. I bought a new pair of headphones, and at the behest of Jeff Atwood from Stack Overflow fame, amongst other things, I also got a miniature desk amp / digital to analog converter. So it's this little box and it sits on your desk. It's called I think you pronounce it FiO. It's the FiO E10 something or other, E10K or something. Anyway, so it's USB out from your computer and it goes into this little box, right? So your little box is getting digital signals. And then the box converts it to analog using a pretty decent DAC chip. And it's also got an amp in it, so you get a little volume knob on the front here. And I am blown away at the sound quality difference of versus what I had before. So I was just using a cheap pair of like the Microsoft headset, and it was USB. It's got a crappy DAC in it, but it's also got a it's a headset, right? So it's got a mic in it. But man, oh man, between my new set of cans and this DAC amplifier, it is such sweet sound.
Is it really? It's that much of a difference?
I really do. I can't tell how much of it is the better DAC, because typically motherboards have they have an okay digital to analog chip, but you can notice quite a big step up by going to something more specialized. But I'm pretty sure it's all in the headphones. Like for me, at least, I'm no mega hi-fi audio specialist. But I got some Audio-Technica M50Xs, which, oh my goodness, like it's like night and day, man. It's like having cotton wool pulled out of your ears and being able to hear clearly.
Man, I have to sit there. I'm curious to try out your system one day, because I like high quality sound when I'm listening to music, especially when got it on in my head most of the time during the day. But I've got like that. I have that Bose set up at home, and then I just plug the headphones into that when I've got to put the headphones on. But usually I just have the speakers just kind of blaring out. So I'm curious.
Yeah, it's for me, it's made a big difference. I mean, you're not going to notice on things like Skype, right? Because it's crappy sound in general, right? But if you're playing FLAC files or something like that, you got to have, obviously, it's all about the weakest link in the chain, right? So if you're putting in crappy recordings, you're not going to get a good sound out. Yeah. But it's made a nice change for me.
Nice. Cool.
How about you?
So I've got one. I'm going to give a shout out to a Twitter handle called Azure Support. So I ran into a little problem the other day, actually yesterday, where I was one of those people that had not gotten around to reorganizing my Azure resources when they announced the ARM stuff, so the resource manager stuff within Azure.
Yep.
And so I had a bunch of things like default SQL-East US and default web-East 2 and default this. So all this stuff, it was just like I had different resource groups for different things, but nothing was organized. I really wanted like a resource group for my Orchard deployment, a resource group for this other work thing that I have, and being able to check costs. And so I wanted to go rename and move stuff around. You can't rename resource groups. And so I had to create new resource groups and move resources from one group to the next. The way you do this is through command line. And really the only way I've seen to do it is through PowerShell or through their REST API. You can't do it, as far as I can tell, through the command line interface, the cross-platform one. So I had to fire up a Windows VM to do this. And everything was running just fine. It's a fairly slow process, but it works just fine. But I stubbed my toe on one where I wanted to move a SQL server and two databases in that SQL server, the Azure SQL server, from one resource group into another one that had my Orchard instance. And you can't do that one through the command line because the SQL server and each database are considered individual resources. So there's 3 resources if you have 2 databases, 1 server, 2 databases. And but they do have a way to do it through the preview portal. And so I said, move all this from one resource to the next. And when I did it, it said everything was successful. Everything still worked, except one of my databases disappeared. Now, the weird thing is the database was definitely still there and was still working because the websites didn't blow up.
They just dropped off the radar.
It just didn't show up. And then all of a sudden, it did show up. Now, in the resource group, it would only show one database and one server. If I clicked on the server and went to the server detail blade, it showed both databases. But when I clicked on the problem database, it said unavailable, which is what you usually see when it's offline. But the site was still working. I killed cache and saw everything was still working. I didn't know what to do. I was at a complete loss. I tried different browsers, forced caching to refresh. So I put a message out on the Azure support Twitter handle. They got back to me right away. We went back and forth about 3 or 4 tweets. They said, hey, follow us so that we can do a DM. We started doing a DM. I gave them my subscription ID. I gave them some other stuff. They said, send an email with a screenshot to this guy, right, to this person. So they gave me a Microsoft email address. I sent it to this one individual. Responded within about 30 seconds and said, I'm on it. Started looking at it, asked me 2 or 3 questions, said, just to be safe, did you take a backup of the database? I'm like, yes, I did before I did this. I was smart. And he had everything was fixed and cleaned in about 35 minutes.
Wow. And
it didn't cost me a dime. They responded right away. I was like, how in the world can I give you guys good feedback on this? And he's like, just follow up on the Twitter thread that we had. Just say that you were happy with your support. So if you have a problem with Azure that's like with your system, and it's not like a tech support kind of a thing that, that would need a support contract, but a real problem with like the system, tweet at Azure support, and then they're going to try and give you a hand. And if they say that, hey, this is something you need a contract for, then they may go through and point you on how to do that. But I was very impressed.
That's really good. Hey, it's not often we come across like good support stories, right? Normally people want to talk about the bad ones, but that's awesome.
Yeah, I wish Office 365 had something like this, but hey.
Yeah, nice.
Feedback.
All right, man. Hey, well, it's been a good show. Thanks for chatting.
Absolutely. More Azure fun. So we'll see everybody next week.
Catch you soon.
If you have a question for us, go to microsoftcloudshow.com/questions, where you can submit it as text or record it as a WAV or MP3 and provide a link so we can play your question on the show. You can subscribe to us in iTunes by searching for Microsoft Cloud Show or via RSS at microsoftcloudshow.com, where you'll also find a full transcript and show notes of each episode. You can also find us on Facebook, searching for Microsoft Cloud Show, or on Twitter at MS Cloud Show. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.